Hi. Today I would like to talk about the first king who patronized Buddhism in India. I would like to take you back to the ancient times in the 6th century BC. It was a time when India had a lot of tribes, but these tribes did not identify themselves with the name of the tribe. There were a group of tribes who lived in a particular piece of land. There was a dominant tribe out of this group of tribes, and all these group of tribes identified themselves with the land in which they lived rather than by the name of each of the tribes, because they can't do it because they are a group in a particular land. There was a time before this when the tribes had identified individually with the name of their tribes, but we have come beyond that stage, and now it is the 6th century BC, and as I mentioned, the tribes, the group of tribes identified themselves with the name of the land in which they lived. And the land in which they lived in general was called Janapada. Whenever a number of Janapadas had united under a king, that whole pieces of land knit together, that whole land that would come up was called a Mahajanapada. There were 16 Mahajanapadas by the 6th century BC as per a Buddhist source, and the most dominant Mahajanapada at that time emerged as a place called Magadha. Magadha, which was the present day Bihar, was ruled by a king called Bimbisara. It was a time when a Prince Siddhartha of the Sakya clan had moved out of his house to find solutions to the sufferings of life. He was the son of a king of the Sakya clan called Suddhodana, and Prince Siddhartha was wandering about from place to place. He had been practicing asceticism, and on one occasion he was moving through a place called Rajgir, which was the capital of the Mahajanapada which I mentioned, Magadha. The king Bimbisara of this kingdom had noticed the prince from his palace window. He had recognized that the person who he had noticed was a prince because he knew his father, the king Suddhodana of the Sakya clan, whose capital was at Kapilavastu at the foothills of the Himalayas. The king had assumed that the prince had probably fallen out with his father. The king Bimbisara, after having noticed Siddhartha moving through his capital, went to Siddhartha, followed him, talked to him, and invited him to come to his court. King Bimbisara had also offered Siddhartha half his kingdom. When Siddhartha heard all these offers, Siddhartha told Bimbisara that he was on a mission to find answers to the sufferings of life, and for this he had left his own home at Kapilavastu. his family, his wife, and child. And therefore, Siddhartha said that he did not want to stay in Rajgir or have half the kingdom that King Bimbisara had offered to Siddhartha. King Bimbisara had accepted Siddhartha's thinking, but he also wanted Siddhartha that once he had attained the knowledge about the answers he had been seeking, about the sufferings of life, Siddhartha should come back to his capital and should also enlighten the king about the answers that he had discovered. To this, Siddhartha had promised that he would come and return to Rajgir. Finally, during one time, on a particular day, after he was enlightened, after he had found answers to his questions about sufferings of life, Siddhartha, as he had promised, had come back, had returned to the capital, but this time, as opposed to when he was alone, the last time when he met the King Bimbisara, now he had a large group of disciples with him. And Siddhartha had become famous as a religious preacher, and this information had spread through Rajgir. It had not taken much time for it to reach the king himself, Bimbisara. When the king got this news, he, along with some of his subjects, had gone to the gateway of the capital Rajgir to receive and welcome Prince Siddhartha. Later, Prince Siddhartha would be known as Buddha, but for now, let me call him Siddhartha. There, King Bimbisara meets Siddhartha and his disciples. He also recognizes Siddhartha, but the subjects of the king, Bimbisara, who had come along with him, could not quite recognize who Siddhartha was among the group of disciples and Siddhartha himself. Siddhartha then was able to spot the predicament of the subjects. To rectify this, he had asked a question to one of his disciples, Kassapa. It was the uncertainty of the subjects between Kasyapa and Siddhartha. They were confused between these two people as to who Siddhartha was. And when Siddhartha had asked the question to Kasyapa and Kasyapa answered it, later Kasyapa also pointed to Siddhartha, saying that Siddhartha was the enlightened one. With this, the people understood who the real Buddha was. The king himself, as I told you, had immediately recognized who the Buddha was after he had seen Siddhartha at the gateway. The king, as he requested a few years back for getting the knowledge that Siddhartha would attain, was able to get the knowledge. And this receiving of the knowledge from the Buddha was said to be a kind of first stage to enlightenment, and in this way, Bimbisara had also attained a kind of enlightenment. Bimbisara, after having received Siddhartha and his disciples at the gateway of capital Rajgir, invited them into his palace, provided them meals, and also gifted them a garden, a pleasure garden, a bamboo grove. A grove is a small region that had a number of trees of similar type. And this was presented by King Bimbisara. And to mark this presenting of the gift, Bimbisara had poured water to Buddha from a golden jar. Buddha and his disciples used the garden. The garden was called Veluvana. Buddha had used it for 3 successive rainfalls and also a number of rainfalls later. This way, by presenting a garden and by accepting the teachings of Buddha, by becoming enlightened himself, King Bimbisara had patronized Buddhism. He was the first king in India to have patronized Buddhism. He was a king who reigned between 544 to 491 BC, and later in his capital Rajgir, the first Buddhist council would be held, and Bimbisara himself, after his meeting with the Buddha at the gateway and inviting him and calling him to the palace, after that for 37 years, Bimbisara patronized Buddhism. Hopefully, this story helped you to understand, firstly, who was that king who patronized Buddhism in India, and also how he did it. Thank you.